Hello class, my name is Gill and welcome to the third week of Research Methods for Social Workers. I want to go through the course objectives and the assignment for this week as well as a PowerPoint. Before I begin, I want to make a quick point about the discussion board. From my view, last week the discussion board included three major questions. What was the design, major findings, implications for social work moving forward? And what I want to recommend is that as you move forward with your discussion board post, that you actually include in your sentence, the research methodology is, the finding is, the implications for social work include. That way, as an instructor, you're pointing me right to the answer to your question. I would even go so far as for the research design and for the findings that you provide an in-text citation. For example, Gill 2021, page 4. That way I know exactly where to go if I have any questions with regard to your answer. Just some suggestions there. With regard to the objectives for week 3, we want to identify different qualitative and quantitative methods. We want to look at what distinguishing characteristics each of these methods have and why they're different. We want to be cognizant of how our methods are influenced by the type of research question that we're asking. And then we also want to know or to become to understand that they're mixed methods, right? I can have a group of teen fathers and I can administer a survey, but I can have that same group of teen fathers and bring them into a focus group and engage in a different set of questions and themes related to the particular research question. Always important to have your objectives in mind as you move forward. In terms of the activities and assignments, you're digging deep now into your literature review and synthesis, and I know that the class has decided in many instances to work in groups, and I totally understand that, but I do want to emphasize that there are 4 different aspects of this particular assignment: the issue and problem, what is known about it, summarize what others have done in examining the issue and problem, and then the conclusion. And I really think if it's possible for each person to be involved in all 4 of the 4 areas of this particular synthesis, because it's important for you in terms of understanding the overall research process. In terms of number 2, state what is known about the issue or the problem. It's really important there that you rely on quantitative evidence as well as qualitative, that your work be heavily cited. But I want to say something else. I'm not a big fan of a lot of quotes. Okay, I've noticed that some of the entries in the discussion board include lengthy quotes. I would prefer that you paraphrase, and so please keep an eye on that. And then your key takeaways in terms of your conclusion, in terms of your synthesis. That's really important, to have a key takeaway. You've got to move the conversation forward, right? So a conclusion, why you want to summarize and regurgitate the information to a degree. You always want to move the conversation forward. What did you learn? How did this inform your potential research design? Where do you see the gaps in the research? Should there be more qualitative than quantitative? Those are the types of ways that you can move the conversation forward. And if there's any way that I can be helpful with regard to you completing your literature review, by all means let me know. A lot of slides this week, right? A lot of slides, and so I want to fast forward, and I want to fast forward to slide number 8, because I think some key terms are very important. Methods of reasoning. How are you viewing this particular problem? How do you work through the rationale? Certainly our standing as social workers influence it, our gender, our race, our SES, our major areas of study in undergraduate, whether it's psychology or philosophy, all influence our different ways of reasoning. And then there's deductive and inductive reasoning, right? Deductive reasoning, we start from a more general and we go to the specific. With inductive reasoning, it's the opposite. We move from specific observations to broader generalizations and theories. And for your groups, I think that this is a critical question that you answer. Is your research more inductive or is it more deductive? because again, it's going to impact your methods throughout your study. Okay, I'm going to move forward in terms of your slide presentation to slide number 19 in your research methodology. As you begin to collect articles, it is very important that you are able to go to your methods section and say, this was a single subject research design, or this was a O1X02 classical research design. Those are important. Research methodology is defined as models that provide specific directions for procedures in a research design. It's important that you be able to identify the research design, so then you're able to understand the procedures that follow in the research design. So that's very, very important. There are three major types of research methodologies. Again, quantitative, we're dealing more with numbers. Qualitative, we're dealing with words, thoughts, feelings, themes, ideas, not numbers. And then you've got mixed methods, which is a combination between the two. Slide 23 goes on to provide some more information with regard to quantitative and qualitative distinctions. Quantitative, counting, assigning values to observations, relationships between variables, right? The relationship between the amount of cookies that I eat and what it says on the scale. And then it also helps to rule out alternative explanations, right? So, if I've got cookies and I've got tortilla chips and, I've got, let's say, some protein, and depending on which one is higher at a particular time, my weight is also going to fluctuate. And so we understand the relationship between variables. With regard to qualitative, methods used to seek understanding of experiences and viewpoints of social actors, provides firsthand knowledge of an actor's world. And that's important because some of you may be proposing research that's really cutting edge, that's really hasn't been done before, and is really needed. And that begs for a qualitative design, because you have to understand the variables, right, and what they are and what exists before you can move to a quantitative method and understand how those variables impact one another. So you're talking about your methods of reasoning. You've done your research design. You've decided on whether or not it's going to be qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. And it's really important to go through these repetitions. Again, slide 27 talks about quantitative methodologies and how the goal is to find support for a theory or hypothesis, to look at the relationship between different variables. And when we talk about quantitative work, slide 29 talks about descriptive studies, where I might be describing the number of individuals who experienced COVID and what type of symptomology they experienced in an urban area. Then there's survey studies, where I would go out and survey those individuals, maybe talk or do a mail survey, a telephone survey, and find more about their experience. Did they have certain pre-existing conditions? Did they have access to medical care? And then there's also, in terms of quantitative methods, a needs assessment. For example, looking at COVID again and health disparities, what type of health services would have been essential to certain Black and brown people during the climax of COVID, so to speak. And then lastly, with quantitative, we also have program evaluation, meta-analysis, and systematic reviews. All right. When we talk about research designs, there are three types, and we've talked about these before. The exploratory, right? Those new topics, that cutting edge research. Descriptive designs, I'm going to describe what the problem looks like, all the variables that are involved, describing the people involved and their characteristics. That's very important. And then explanatory, which in a nutshell sort of goes to, I know that this certain set of variables exists within this certain population, and I know that there's another set of variables that impact their well-being, and I need to figure out, as one variable moves up, how it impacts another variable. But we can talk a little bit about that later. In terms of qualitative methodology, I'm a qualitative methodologists, how people live, how they behave, what captivates them, what stresses them. And when we talk about, and I am on slide number 36 right now, the qualitative landscape, ethnographies, that's when you are taking surveys and focus groups and observational studies and you put them all together. One of my favorites is by Dr. Elijah Anderson when he was examining the street drug trade in Philadelphia, and autoethnography, when you're studying one's own culture and oneself as a part of the culture. Phenomenology, when you are examining how human beings make sense of their lived experience. How do we make sense of everything that's been going on from a social justice standpoint? All right. And then we also have symbolic interaction, heuristic studies, narrative studies, grounded theory. I'm on slide 38 right now. But at its essence, when understanding, once you're able to decide on a qualitative landscape approach, then you need to think about methods, focus groups, interviews, observational studies are three that come to mind. All right, so there is, following your slides, there are some weekly activities, and I think that these weekly activities will help pace you through your literature review and your research project. So they're really, really, really important in terms of what's your area of interest, in terms of posing different research questions. This process is important in research. And then lastly, there's some helpful hints on slide number 44. And then it talks about, the process starting on slide 45 about the literature review assignment. And I think it's just so important to outline. An outline is important in research, that you outline some of these questions before you start writing and trying to make it sound all fancy and researchy. Okay. And so slide 46 talks about the grading, and then there's some other information again in terms of slide 49 in terms of outlining your particular work. But as I close this video, what I really want to emphasize is that you've got to think through this, right? As you're going through your problem and thinking about your methods, think through it. And is what you are proposing supported by the prior step? And trust me, if you go through these steps and if you use these questions and you use the PowerPoint, trust me, the research proposal and literature review process is not as daunting as it may seem. But as always, if I can help you in any way, I'm only email and if necessary a phone call away. I want to work with you. I want you to be successful. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. And I hope you have an incredible week. Take care. Bye-bye.